Happy Sunday night. Welcome to the Inquirer podcast. We are live on our YouTube channel. It is Jeremy Werner and Joey Wagner. And we are live tonight because Illinois football gets a big transfer commitment. But first of all, happy Mother's Day to everyone out there. Hopefully everyone had some time to spend with their mothers. I appreciate the mothers in my life, both my own, my mother-in-law, and my wife. So shout out to everybody for that. Joey, how was your weekend?
It's good, man. Got to home, see my mom for Mother's Day today. I was talking to her, got the bat signal from 24/7 alerts that Terrence Brooks had committed, and wrapped up a visit. And I guess he wrapped up a visit. I wrapped up a visit in Pekin, got home, and let's talk about it, man. It's a big get.
Yeah, huge get for Illinois football. And we're going to have Jeff Howe from Horns 24/7 join us, and he's really good, has some insight on Terrence Brooks. He's going to join us here in about 10 minutes to break down what Terrence Brooks did at Texas, strengths, maybe areas he struggles. But regardless, Joey, this was an all Big 12 performer who started 19 games of his 23 games at Texas. He still has 2 years of eligibility left. He's going to be a junior next season. 24/7 Sports rates him as a 4-star transfer, the number 11 cornerback prospect in the transfer portal this entire offseason. He was going to take visits to USC and Michigan this past week, but you were in on this a couple weeks ago that Illinois was prioritizing Terrence Brooks. Aaron Henry had visited him in home multiple times, I am told. And obviously that really keyed a relationship, Joey. We have talked about the Devin Witherspoon sell and how Illinois had not used it successfully in the transfer portal to this point. And you and I kind of wondered, why hadn't cornerback been a priority? It'd been a little bit of a wait, Joey, but they get a guy who's one of the best on the market, a guy that I think probably commanded pretty good NIL dollars from a lot of these schools, but a great opportunity for him to start and a huge upgrade for Illinois, what we believe was the biggest position of need. So why do you think this is such a significant get?
Because you get a cornerback one, right? And Illinois had a lot of cornerbacks. I don't know that I would have qualified any of them as a number one corner in the Big Ten. I think we like what Xavier Scott could have done if he bounced outside. Also like what he does in the nickel. And otherwise it was a really inexperienced room, much as it was a year ago when the defense struggled. You go out and you get a guy who started on a college football playoff team, a guy who started in the Big 12, does have improvements to make. But, yeah, Aaron Henry, I'm sure I would bet almost anything that he sold the Devin Witherspoon pitch, and we can get into what that means for Illinois here after a little while here. But this is a top-line corner that you need. And you're right, that position is scary. Like to think of what they were potentially going to roll out there. I know that they really felt they needed to address that after spring ball, and they go out and they get a guy and you stop him effectively from taking other visits to USC and to Michigan. You get him to jump on board early, and all the credit to Aaron Henry, man. He did a really good job from the start on this, reaching out with the family and ultimately getting him to commit today.
Yeah, Terrence had 6 pass deflections last year, 3 interceptions. Big guy, 6'1", about 210. So he's a big physical corner. Like we think of Xavier Scott, he's not over 200 pounds. Tower Strain, not over 200 pounds. He's got Terrence Brooks has a really long wingspan, more big physical guy. This is what they needed in that room, especially after Zach Tobey leaves, who I thought was a bigger guy, less proven than Terrence Brooks, but had that potential to be someone like that. And Caleb Patterson is just unproven at this point, right, Joey? He's got that size, he's got that length, but he's not a 19-game starter for one of the best programs in the country. So to get him is huge. And for Aaron Henry, he needed this. I mean, the secondary lost so much talent from a year ago. And while it had some depth pieces that it added, Nicario Harper and Clayton Bush, and I don't know if they had huge expectations for Demetrius Hill. Like they added some safeties last year, but corner, they just kind of went the JUCO market with Caleb Patterson and Prince Ford and got 12 defensive snaps from those guys and had a rush freshman in. And then you're thinking this offseason, I get the trenches are a priority, but corner has got to be a priority as well. And I think they learned that again after spring ball and said, okay, we have to go get guys. Chase Canada, we didn't even really get a good look at him because of hamstring injury. They had to go get a really good player. And this guy has a really high floor. You already know he can compete with some of the best in the country. And as you said, you needed a guy you can put in and rely on week in and week out to compete with some of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten. And this guy has done that. Like he He was going up. I know the college football playoff game did not go so well for Texas's secondary, but he was going up against Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk, like all those guys. He was going up week in and week out in the Big 12 as well.
Yeah, and to go get a guy, the Big Ten's getting better. We've talked about that a lot. And to get a guy, and it's not an easy schedule this year in the conference, to get a guy you can put out there and feel like you have trust, a guy who can really help usher in some of those younger guys. I mean, Terrence Brooks played a lot of football, a lot of high-level football. So to be able to help those younger corners, I feel like Illinois missed that last year. And that's not a knock on Taz Nicholson, the older guy in the room, but I don't know that he had that pull that Devin Witherspoon had, who was able to maybe get everyone kind of on board. And obviously there was a talent discrepancy there, but we'll see if Brooks can kind of be that guy to help get these next guys ready this year.
Here's the thing, Joey. They lost Taz Nicholson, who was one of your best corners last year, right? Like, so Taz, like, I think they had confidence Taz could step into a bigger role and maybe take a significant step forward. That didn't happen. He had too many penalties, right, in crucial moments. Xavier Scott did step into the role they thought they could, but I think they were a little overconfident in their development last year and kind of went with these under the radar guys. They had to go get a proven guy, and they did that.
Yeah, and I'm curious if this will maybe affect their approach next offseason, where I don't know that being in a really needy state come the spring portal window is a place you want to find yourself.
Yeah,
because it's a competitive market out there. So I'm wondering if maybe next offseason they see a position of need at X or Y and they say, let's just do it in the winter and see if we can get through this. Now, as we've seen across the landscape, that doesn't ensure they're going to be there in the summer and the fall, but to try to address that earlier, I guess in this case, it didn't matter because they got a pretty good corner out of the whole deal.
I mean, there's the potential here that Terrence Brooks is the biggest offseason upgrade you've made at a starting spot, right? Like
potential.
JC Davis, I mean, Julian Pearl was all Big Ten honorable mention. Now, JC Davis over what Brandon Henderson would have been as a sophomore, probably as big, but like Terrence Brooks has the potential to be the biggest offseason upgrade along with JC Davis. I think those two are the biggest offseason additions you have made at just premium positions. I mean, we talk about the NFL draft and, you know, quarterback Illinois has done pretty well in the transfer portal, right? But those other premium positions, now this offseason, you've seen left tackle, you've seen defensive line. They've had to do that, obviously, and we'll see how that bears out. They're trying to add more. They're going to try and add a wide receiver. We'll get to Zakhari Franklin out of Ole Miss here in a couple minutes, but also a corner like Terrence Brooks. You need a guy who could shut down. We saw how valuable that is, and I'm not going to say he's Devin Witherspoon, but if you're an all Big 12 type corner, you're a good starter. And outside of Xavier Scott, at cornerback, I didn't even know if you had a serviceable starter yet, Joey, outside of that. And that's what's great about this addition. It kind of pushes down that depth chart where Xavier Scott and Terrence Brooks are starters. And then Tyler Strain, we think, is likely the next guy up, maybe at nickel now, and they can move Xavier Scott out to the outside or flop those two guys. They have some versatility. But now Caleb Patterson has to battle for a starting spot. Jaheim Clark has to battle for a starting spot. Chase Canada, these unproven guys, like they have to work to get those reps in a game. And that's just monstrous. Like if you had to go in with two of those question marks, that would have been pretty scary going into after what we saw last season.
Absolutely. And that's also us assuming a little bit that Xavier Scott's going to move outside. I mean, no one's really come out and said that. It makes all the sense in the world to me as to why we think that, but it's a little bit of assumption on our end too. So yeah, I guess, Jeremy, how much does this change your immediate outlook in the secondary? Because I worry about depth there, but like I think getting a number one guy is something that should make you feel a lot better.
I'd feel better about Toby. If Toby were still here, I'd feel a lot better. Like, 'cause I know that guy can compete. We saw him start games. I saw him have some success, saw him struggle, but I think that guy can be a starter eventually in his career. I just wasn't completely comfortable with it as a sophomore. But yeah, if you have an injury, all of a sudden you do have to rely on Caleb Patterson, or you do have to rely on Tyler Strain on the outside, or whatever it is. So yeah, I could still add one more corner. It becomes harder to do that now that you don't have maybe a starting position to obviously sell here. But I certainly feel better than I felt yesterday about the secondary, because cornerback was my biggest weakness on the roster. There's still ifs here, right? Like, can Terrence Brooks take that next step? Like, obviously he's coming here to be developed by Aaron Henry, to be a starter and to potentially be an NFL player. That was part of the big sell here. He's got to take that next step. I thought he was a solid starter at Texas. Now it's all relative. That's a huge upgrade for Illinois. but you need Matthew Bailey to be healthy. You need, your other free safety, Miles Scott, to take another step forward. So that's going to be key for them.
Yeah, it will. I do feel better about the ones, assuming, as you mentioned, Terrence Brooks can take a step. How big of a step does he need to take this year? I don't know. A cervical starter at corner feels pretty important for a program that we didn't think had one going in or coming out of the spring. So, yeah, I like that. I would wonder if they'd be interested in a second one, if they could make the right move on that. But I think we'll get to Zakhari Franklin. I think with some defensive line you would like to address. They got a couple scholarships to work with, which I thought going into this kind of spring portal cycle was really important for Illinois. But the Aaron Henry development, I think this also tells us, Jeremy, without everyone coming out and saying, I feel like Aaron Henry is going to go back to coaching cornerbacks this year.
Yes. Yeah.
And the new defensive backs coach is going to coach safeties. It's just a flip of what had been done defensively in Brett Bielema's tenure. Ryan Walters worked with safeties. Then last year, Aaron Henry did. I feel like that's going to change this year.
All right. Jeff Howe does a great job covering Texas, one of the obviously biggest markets for 24/7 sports. He's joining us now to give us some real good insight here on the newest Illini cornerback, Terrence Brooks. Jeff, hey, thanks for taking some time out tonight with this breaking news of Terrence Brooks coming to Illinois. Appreciate you, man. How are you?
Jeremy, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. You guys do an outstanding job. And I still feel bad for the glass of spilt water at dinner in Des Moines 2 years ago. So, or last spring, I guess that was. So still my bad for that, but no, everything's good.
I'd actually forgotten about that, Jeff. So now I'm remembering it, but it's just water, man. It was just water. It dried up.
Water under the bridge as
right.
well. So
that's right. Well done. Well done. All right. Terrence Brooks came to Texas, top 100 prospect. I mean, that doesn't happen often at Illinois. Obviously does a lot at Texas. But what was the excitement about him coming in? How can you kind of just take us through his 2 years there? Because obviously starting 19 games as an underclassman, that's impressive at Texas.
Yeah, when he came in, he was a kid from the Dallas area. It's interesting because, his dad, Chet Brooks, actually, went to Texas A&M and came up with the name The Wrecking Crew. Didn't really show A&M a whole lot of interest and, flipped him from Ohio State. That was one that the Texas staff, Terry Joseph, Jeff Banks, they worked really, really hard to get Terrence Brooks. And, probably halfway through his freshman year, he was playing kind of off and on. And then Deshaun Jameson got injured and missed their game against TCU. And that was really Terrence Brooks coming out party. They just kind of threw him out there and said, hey, kid, sink or swim. And he did a great job and played really well the back half of his freshman year. I think where you kind of started to see some things maybe get off kilter a little bit. Texas played Washington in the Alamo Bowl at the end of the 22 season. And, anybody that's watched Kalen DeBoer's offense, it's a lot of switch routes, a lot of bunch formations. It's a pretty sophisticated passing game. And the staff went back to starting and primarily playing Deshaun Jameson because they didn't really feel like Terrence Brooks was ready to handle that. And that was kind of the story of his season last year. If it was a situation where, and Texas played a lot of pattern match cover 4, a lot of match quarters, like Nick Saban match quarters, the Pat Narduzzi, Gary Patterson match quarters. They love playing that. And Terrence Brooks, if it's a straight up man or a concept that devolves into man coverage, he was great. He really, really struggled, though, in zone coverage. And he's a really good technician when it comes to man coverage. But for whatever reason, zone concepts just really seem to give him problems. And I think that continued into the spring where Texas defensively, they're going to play some more cover 3 this year. Last year they took Gavin Holmes, a Wake Forest transfer who had a couple of years left. And by the end of the spring, that was a battle. And then honestly, that was one of the few position battles Texas has where I was actually shocked it was a battle because I expected Terrence Brooks to pull away and win that job. And, you start hearing some things where maybe he wanted some guarantees that he was going to start. And, when a guy transfers out, as you guys know, you're going to hear a couple different sides of the story, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But Texas fans were extremely high on Terrence Brooks. I love Terrence Brooks. And, he made plays, but it seemed like it's kind of life of a cornerback in the Big 12. And when you go against, offense like Washington's, the big plays you give up are really, really big plays. And, I think everybody remembers Jalen Polk pulling away from him in the Sugar Bowl for that first big play Washington had. So I'll say this, the production and the performance didn't quite match up with the talent, but I think it's probably best for both parties because, like I said, with Texas shifting to where I think especially with Johnny Nansen coming in as a co-defensive coordinator, they're going to play a little more cover 3. Yeah. I think for Terrence Brooks to go to a place like Illinois where he's going to play, a lot of man coverage, that's right up his alley.
I was going to say, Jeff, Illinois runs man like 70% of the time. So this makes a lot of sense from a fit perspective. When he plays man, what makes him an effective cornerback? And when he plays zone, what does he struggle with?
I think when he plays man, the recovery speed is okay, but I think just his physicality, he can really get up in guys. He's long. He can get his hands on guys. He's able to reroute guys and just be physical. With zone, I think it's maybe just some concepts conceptually that he struggles with understanding the route tree. And you can kind of see it when he's in zone coverage. It's, when you see a really good zone corner, they do a really good job of eliminating routes on the route tree as things develop. And it just seemed like, I don't know if it's a problem with him processing on the fly or if it's just something where he and Terry Joseph, the corners coach, who's also the defensive pass game coordinator at Texas, if they just weren't on the same page, but something was amiss in zone coverage. But, like you said, Jeremy, if he's a 70-75% man coverage guy where they're just going to say, hey, we're going to line up and, cover one or cover four or whatever, and you just get up on guys and reroute guys and run with guys, I think that really can allow his talent to flourish. Because trust me, this guy, there's no question other than Malik Muhammad, who looked really, really good as a freshman and probably only going to be at Texas another 2 years before he goes to the NFL. He was the most naturally gifted corner Texas had. So this isn't like somebody that Texas was just willing to part with. This was a really big loss. And if you ever get the production and the presence to match the talent, you got a guy that's going to play in the NFL. It's only a matter of where in the draft is he going to go.
Jeff, you know how this goes. Is spring kind of wears down, you can get a sense of who's going, who's staying, just in your conversation. Was he a surprise? Was he a guy that when he entered, you were like, oh, I didn't see that coming?
Yeah, because it was probably 72, 48 hours before he entered when you started hearing it. And really, the guys that entered for Texas, by and large, and Terrence was one of maybe two exceptions. Most of those guys, actually, a lot of their guys entered either before the spring game or right after. And most of those guys, they either saw the writing on the wall themselves or, you guys know how it goes. They had already figured out, hey, if I'm going to play somewhere, it probably needs to be somewhere else. Yeah. But his popped up really after he had his exit meeting with Steve Sarkisian, which really kind of makes you wonder, okay, that's where you get both sides of the story. Was it the staff was just kind of, hey, we can't guarantee you anything. We're not going to guarantee you anything. It's going to be a battle or whatever the case was. I said it when it happened. It just sounded like a deal where I think both parties are going to be better off. And at the time, I had no idea Terrence Brooks was ending up at Illinois. I figured a Big Ten spot. I mentioned Michigan early on, and he's not going to make that visit to Michigan now, but I figured that would be a spot that could probably draw some interest. But yeah, it's one of those deals where I just think Texas is now they've got, they picked up a corner out of the portal and they've got a couple corners. They feel really good with what they're doing. And Terrence Brooks is in a spot, like I said, where he can shine. So I think at the end of the day, all parties are probably going to be better off for Terrence Brooks moving on.
Yeah, we only get to see 20% of who these guys are, but what kind of guy is like he's entering an Illinois room that is young. And now, granted, he's not some old guy himself here, but just what kind of guy is he? Is he a guy who's going to maybe kind of grab hold of that room and bring everyone along with him? Or what have you observed about him? Yeah,
you're going to get a professional approach. Like I said, his dad has been training him to be a defensive back pretty much since he could walk. So you're going to get a guy, and anytime you've got a parent with an NFL background, I like when you take those guys because they understand how to work. They understand what it takes, the day in, day out grind. And Terrence Brooks has that. As far as what kind of guy he was, we really don't know because this was going to be the year that he was really going to step into one of those leadership roles. Every year at Texas, he's had an older corner in front of him, whether it was Deshaun Jameson 2 years ago, who's now in the NFL. Last year, Ryan Watts was the veteran in that room. So this was going to be the year where it was really going to be kind of Terrence Brooks's room. So I think he can take that mantle for Illinois. It's just we figured it was going to be at Texas. It's just going to be somewhere else where now he steps into the big chair where all eyes are on him.
Jeff, you mentioned this is a guy that's talent is the NFL. What is his next step to be a day 2 pick or put himself in that kind of regard rather than just finding a way to sneak into the NFL?
I think it's just got to be the zone concepts, just getting better at playing zone coverage. And again, he's not going to do that a ton at Illinois, but everything else is there. And that was kind of the frustrating thing is you saw times where it looked like it was really coming together. I mean, he showed at times he could really track the ball well, played in the air, make interceptions, and then at times it looked like he was just lost and couldn't track it and looked like he probably didn't belong on the field at a power conference school. So I think it's just the consistency putting it all together, because I'm telling you, when he flashes and you see it come together, you're like, yeah, that's what an NFL corner looks like. But like I said, when it misses, it misses bad. But so hopefully if the Illinois staff can get him to a point where you just get the consistency out of him, I think it's not an effort thing. I think it's just an experience thing. And if he can get all that to come together, there's no question. I mean, I think you're talking about a guy, Jeremy, that's got the skill set, the talent to be a day 2 pick, maybe even get himself into that mix to where you're talking about a guy, does he sneak into round 1? I think he's that gifted. It's just a matter of can the ebbs and flows kind of even out for him a little bit.
Jeff, before we let you go, you mentioned the Big Ten programs are in pursuit. Michigan, and I have to train myself, USC. Now, a Big Ten program that is in the mix here. Are you settled? Are you like all in with the SEC now? How are Texas fans and people around the program feeling? Are you feeling like you're all SEC already?
It's kind of getting that way, because I actually found myself. It's funny. I found myself a couple of weeks ago trying to look at spring reports for what's Baylor doing, what's Texas Tech doing, what's TCU doing. I'm thinking, oh, those guys aren't on the schedule anymore. I need to be looking at Kentucky and Mississippi State. So, yeah, it's a little interesting. But the exciting thing for the Texas fan base is, one, you get the Texas A&M game back, which I was one of the people on the Texas side that thought, they don't need to play the Aggies. It doesn't matter. Just fill in an opponent. And I remember that first Thanksgiving game against TCU where you're looking around and the stadium's like 2/3 full, and you're like, yeah, this kind of sucks. Like, I kind of wish the A&M game was still going on. So there's that part of it. And so you don't lose the Oklahoma game. You still get the Oklahoma game, and you get Arkansas on the schedule. So it's almost like throwing it back to the Southwest Conference days. Like, you get to have your cake and eat it too. So, but speaking of Big Ten, Texas has that game at the Big House. They go to Ann Arbor second week of the season. So that's one that I know a lot of people have circled. But yeah, it's starting to get to the point where, we've been thinking about it long enough, and it's like, man, July 1st is right around the corner. And, thinking about going to SEC media days instead of Big 12. It's going to be some adjusting for sure. But the Texas fan base, without question, they're pumped about it.
Jeff, that is such a media nerd thing of me. I never thought about the media day part of it. That is a media nerd thing, because it's like usually you see the same 10, 12, 15 reporters you've seen for years. Good luck, man. A lot of new faces. Hope they're kind to you at dinner.
Yeah, I've been, whether it's, Jeremy Clark at our TCU side or anybody else, Michael Swaim at Kansas, I'm like, dude, I don't know when I'm going to work with you guys again, because, maybe like an NCAA tournament for basketball or something, run across those guys. But now, and what's cool, Joey, is for Big 12 SEC Media Days, it's in Dallas this year.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah. So it's still, for me, it's still a 3-hour drive from the house either way. So kind of lucked out with that.
Well, Jeff Howe, you and the crew do a great job at Horns 24/7. We can't thank you enough, man, for the time tonight. Hit you up late to do this, and appreciate you guys hopping on with us and giving us some insight on Terrence Brooks, man.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Like I said, you guys are doing a great job. Keep killing it, and I hope all the Illinois fans listening to this, watching this right now, know how lucky they are to have you guys on the market. Seriously, you guys are doing a great job with that site. Great job with this podcast.
Appreciate you, man. Have a good night.
Appreciate you, man.
Anytime, guys.
All right, great stuff from Jeff Howe. Great guy. Yeah, he spilled water on me on a dinner, but I don't hold it against him. I'd actually forgotten.
If he says nice stuff about, I don't care what you can spill on you at dinner. Hey, I'm hooked on the man coverage thing. Like, that was my biggest takeaway. I
haven't dove into the film yet.
Ask me, dude. I'll put a comma there. It doesn't matter.
But I haven't dived into the film yet. But I looked at the PFF numbers, and the one thing I'm diving through, looking at all these different little things, and the one thing that stood out is he was bad in zone and he was good in man. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And you see them struggling again. Everyone struggled basically against Washington's passing offense, right, until the championship game. But their secondary was their weakness of the team, given what they had up front with all those draft picks on the defensive front. But that's what stood out to me is if Illinois is going to continue to play man, and Aaron Henry said maybe you got to play more zone here. dude, what they do is they play man coverage, and they'll play at 65% at the lowest end of the spectrum, but more likely 75 to 80% when Ryan Walters was here. Ran a little bit more zone last year. It did not work out well. They're a better man team. I like when they play man more, Joey, because it allows them to be more aggressive up front, to blitz more on third down, which was an issue last year. And I think Aaron Henry just didn't feel like he had the talent to do that last year. Now you had a guy like Terrence Brooks. Maybe it gets Aaron Henry more aggressive in those obvious passing downs as well.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is to get that defense back to that aggressive state. And now I do wonder if maybe that lack of aggression we saw last year was for lack of trust, really, when you start losing bodies back in the defensive backfield. So, yeah, if that's a byproduct of getting Terrence Brooks, that's great. Jeff nailed it. Like, I feel like Aaron Henry, called himself Aaron Henry Witherspoon all weekend. Like, I can't imagine that Devin Witherspoon's name wasn't brought up fewer than 400 times.
Yep.
I mean, like, you hear long, aggressive, kind of physical like that in man coverage. Who do you think of from Illinois? I mean, it fits like that. That's the mold that Illinois is needing. And then you can work on some of those other concepts, right? If Aaron Henry, I'm sure I couldn't fit it in the story from draft weekend, but I asked him about Johnny Newton. And so what sticks out about coaching him? Like, what, any story or something, I guess? And he said, before every game, I asked the guys, what are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? What calls do you like? And Johnny Newton was, quote, shit, call them all. Like, Johnny didn't care. But my point is like, Aaron Henry's going to make sure, like, it didn't look good last year. I'm not trying to sell anyone that it did, but he's going to make sure he's trying to put his guys in a position that they're not uncomfortable with the call. So I think if Terrence Brooks is, I'm not a zone guy, like, I feel like Aaron Henry's not going to try to shoehorn zone into a man team, if that makes sense.
All right, I got 3 thoughts left on Terrence Brooks, kind of adjacent here. You don't get a guy like Terrence Brooks unless you have an NIL operation, right? Like, can we talk about that?
Can we quit that? Can we quit that narrative, for the love of God?
Well, and it's Illinois football, from what we've heard, an icon for football, had a really good spring of raising funds. And I think people realize we need money to compete. We need to invest in our football program if we want wins. I think Josh Whitman knows that. I think Brett Bielema knows that, right? You can go underdeveloped and under-recruited, but at some point you need talent. If you're going to compete in this Big Ten and in the Power 2, which is what it's becoming, and you want to stay in that Power 2, I got to get talent. I got to get some of the best talent in the country. And to do that nowadays, whether it's basketball, which we see is doing well with it, or football, you need money. And I think Illinois has done a really good job the last couple of years of using money and NIL to retain players. And that continues to be the case. We have not seen the stars of this team leave. That is really, really important for a program like Illinois. So that development and retaining is really important. But you also have to go accrue talent. And last year, I don't think they were aggressive enough in doing that outside of Luke Altmaier, right? So now you've gotten J.C. Davis, who had Power 5 schools all over him, right? Like, you went and got Kevin.
Heavy hitters.
Yeah, Kevin Wigginson's the star. Cole Rusk had Ole Miss recruiting him heavily. Now, you had the inside track with the family, being Illini fans there, but you still went and got him. And now, to be in the mix for Zakhari Franklin, to add Terrence Brooks, to be going after defensive linemen who are really wanted players, I think that says Illinois is getting more aggressive in the transfer portal. They have raised the dollars needed for NIL. I think those are really, really important moving forward for Illinois.
Yes. And look, could Illinois have more money? Yes. No program is going to tell you they could use more. Illinois, like, there are bigger pockets in college football in Illinois. No one will tell you otherwise. But this narrative and this thought process that if it comes down to getting some NIL involved for a player, Illinois is immediately out. Like, I think you can look at who they've recruited and think that's not the case. It's like, there's a lot of space between 0 and refusing to participate and sitting like Ohio State, how they've built their basketball and football rosters. Like,
Illinois needs to be more strategic, right? Like, with who they spend on, how they spend it, the impact on all of those different things. Well, Ohio State, Texas, they can just throw around whatever they want. They're going to get $20 million more next year, right? Like, Illinois has got to be a little bit more strategic, but I do think they have become more competitive this offseason with NIL.
And I also want to acknowledge, like, I think Brett Bielema had to evolve.
Yeah.
But since he was hired at Illinois, I think that had to evolve. And I think you're seeing that evolution play out. Like, really until outside of the quarterbacks, until what we think this is a really good transfer cycle. There haven't been very overwhelmingly spectacular gets outside of the quarterbacks prior to this offseason. I'm not going to tell anyone otherwise. There's guys that
they've been going after these depth pieces, like the sand of the concrete, right? Like you're filling in these pieces just in case injuries happen. You can't build that way. Like you can build recruiting classes, develop them if you can retain them, right? But you also have to just go get dudes in the portal now. It doesn't got to be your whole team, but you do have to do that. And they didn't do that last year outside of Luke Altmaier. This year they're there could be 6 or 7 starters they get from the transfer portal.
I'll go just who they have. Terrence Brooks is starting. J.C. Davis is starting. I think Cole Rusk is going to start. Probably more package dependent than anything. That's 3 guys. Dennis Briggs is going to start. I would imagine if they get another defensive lineman, that player is going to start. You're right. They could be 6 or 7. If they get Zakhari Franklin, I know people are itching for us to get into that. He's probably going to start.
Did you mention Melvin Priestley?
Melvin Priestley, I did not. I would pencil him in at right tackle. I get it. I understand if you're a fan and you're seeing all these other programs going and doing this, and Illinois to this point had not been as involved. You would think, man, maybe we're just not competitive. Maybe we're not going to be in a position to maximize the portal. But I think you're seeing that change, and obviously you'd like to see that continue through the rest of this offseason. We'll see how it plays out moving forward. But they're competitive in that market. I don't know. I've heard the narrative too many times that zero, no go, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, they have an NIL operation. It's not as robust as the powerhouses. It might be a little bit behind some of the other middle tier, middle tier Big Ten programs, things like that. But I think we're seeing this offseason it get deployed and evolve. So I just want to mention that. The third thing I want to mention from Terrence Brooks was Aaron Henry successfully closed on this recruitment despite not having a defensive backs coach. Like you mentioned it earlier, they do not have a defensive backs coach. And I want Aaron Henry as the cornerbacks coach because he was really good at it. You think of the guys, Quan Martin too was getting coached by Aaron Henry. He was part of that cornerbacks group. Taz Nicholson had a really good year when Aaron Henry was with that cornerbacks group. I'd like the next coach, the defensive backs coach, who I don't know who it's going to be. I think it should be somebody like David Gibbs. It sounds like David Gibbs is going to be the corners coach though, right?
Yeah. I think from what we saw that first couple spring practices, I thought he was with the corners. No, thank you.
No,
Aaron Henry the corners.
I want Aaron Henry with those corners. It's a position he played. It's a position he developed really well his first couple of years here. It's the position he's coached basically the entire time he's been an assistant coach. And then add a safeties coach and a guy with coordinator experience. That's what I want.
I'm at the point I would be floored if the DB coach has a heavy corner background. I would be truly floored. I don't think you get Terrence Brooks to not take these other visits and to commit on the spot. If you say, hey, it's probably going to be me, it might not, but it's probably going to be I feel like that's a pitch you've got to lean into and say, hey, it's me, man.
I agree. So that's why I speculated. I don't know that just to tell people, but if they hire a corners coach, I think Bielema would come out and say, well, Aaron's leading that room anyway, but I want Aaron in practice coaching those guys. That's what I want.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. And I think that pitch must have been a resonating factor with Terrence Brooks. We'll see. We'll see whenever this position gets filled. We don't have many updates on it. And this is all speculation, like you said, but all the pieces fall into place, right, for that to be the case.
All right, let's get to it. Another potential sizzler here because these are big names. Terrence Brooks is a big name in the portal, 106 in the transfer portal rankings with thousands of players in it, right? That's a big-time addition. Illinois.
Can we add there was one thing. With Terrence Brooks, we didn't have to worry about who their plan B was. I texted you last week, and I was like, what's plan B? Then I saw Michigan and USC. I'm like, oh, my goodness, what is plan B? Because you hadn't heard.
I'm glad you brought this up. I don't know the names. I don't know the names. I've heard there were 3 or 4 other guys they had ready that they could turn to, but they were pretty, I don't want to say all in, but this was their guy. And they prioritized him and they got him. And it's again, I think the NIL, I don't know how important that was to Terrence. It should be important to every player that has a market, right? Get what you're worth on that market. he obviously wants to go someplace where he can play and he can get developed and get to the NFL, but you might as well make a lot of money while you're doing that. And I just think he was the priority guy of this entire offseason, of the spring portal window. This was the priority target, and kudos to them. They got him. They didn't have to go to plan B, which I thought was really important, because I don't think you were finding a guy that had quite the high floor that he does or the high ceiling that he does. The combo of knowing this guy can play at a high level, and then, he could probably get to another level given his pedigree, given he's just finished his sophomore year. I don't think you're finding another guy like that. So kudos to them for the urgency and closing this one down.
Yeah, and then to close out on that, it is my understanding that development was a huge piece of interest for Terrence Brooks, which, I think that makes sense. And that's why I think the Devin Witherspoon, Aaron Henry sell. But yeah, development was big for him as I understood it.
All right, so Zakhari Franklin is another top-tier target. I don't know why he's not rated in the transfer portal rankings, but he was one of the top guys in our transfer portal rankings a year ago after what was an unbelievable career at UTSA. But he goes to Ole Miss, Joey, only plays in 4 games. I think it was 38 receiving yards, 4 catches, something like that during his time there. Started 2 games, had an injury. But then when you go to one of these top-tier programs, and Ole Miss has turned into that, for sure, they got a lot of talent at wide receiver, and he decided to redshirt the rest of the year to preserve another year of eligibility, because otherwise he wouldn't have been drafted. And now Zakhari Franklin hits the transfer portal, and he's going to visit Illinois, which makes all the sense in the world, given that he developed under Barry Lunny's offense, and they had a lot of success together from 2020 to 2021, had about 1,700 receiving yards. We all remember him just dicing up Illinois in those RPOs for 10 receptions for 155 yards and a touchdown as UTSA beat Illinois 37-30 in the beginning of that 2021 season. But 6'1", 185, more than 3,000 career receiving yards, 37 career touchdowns, 38 career touchdowns, I believe it is, with 1 at Ole Miss. This is a proven commodity and a guy in Barry Lunny's offense. I just think the fit makes so much sense for both sides on paper here, Joey, given the familiarity, given that Franklin needs to produce this year, and given that Illinois, I think we saw it during the spring game. Like, there's intriguing talent outside of Pat Bryant in that room, but there's not a guy I'm comfortable relying on outside of Pat Bryant, because those guys are really unproven, got to improve their hands. So this makes all the sense in the world for me.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I hit up you and Ryan Easterling when he went in. I said, boy, if I'm Barry, I'm calling him saying, you had your best success with me. We've got a lot of snaps here for you. Like, yes, there's talent. We can get into what it would mean if they were to add him. But you kind of tried the flashy program thing, right? And an injury set him back, and he ended up redshirting, which was truly great for him in the big picture. Let's try to go back home, right? And home being where Barry Lunny is at this point, and see if you can recreate some of that magic. And if you're Illinois, you would say, got a quarterback who can do it too. Like, we believe in our quarterback to get you the ball and help you be the best version of you. And he's Barry Lunny. It's not X's and O's here, or like apples to apples, I guess, rather. Go look at the depth, the targets of depth for Zakhari Franklin at UTSA and Isaiah Williams last year. Like, Barry Lunny can get guys in space. Zakhari Franklin knows that. And you have Isaiah Williams, David, that says, hey, we're still doing that thing here. Like, we'll still be able to get you out there in some space.
And Barry could say, hey, I got Casey Washington to be an NFL draft pick. I think I can get you to be an NFL draft pick. Like, Casey was a 6th-round draft pick. Especially, he wasn't even on radars. Zakhari is proven to be a better college football player. Obviously, I mean, he's got triple the yards of Casey Washington in his career already. He just needs to go to a place where he knows he can play. And it sounds like Zakhari probably would be able to get to a program immediately in the summer. And if that's the case, Joey, he knows this offense. So even that little hurdle academically of, he needs a little bit more to graduate, it would be seamless transition here. But if you're Illinois, like, he is a priority target, because I'm not comfortable with receiver. And I think my passing offense can be really good with Pat Bryant, with what I have on the offensive line, with Luke Altmaier going into his 2nd year. I'm sorry, it's a hot take. Luke Altmaier excited me last year, guys. Like, what he did was really exciting from a talent perspective. I get what John Paddock did. I get that Luke wasn't perfect, but that was his first year as a starter. He still got 2 years of eligibility. I think the 24/7 Sports rankings were crap, to be honest with you, of the Big Ten quarterbacks. That's him at 17. I think he should be in that middle tier, and I think he can even be better than that, given what I saw from a playmaking perspective. He's got things he needs to improve, But you give him Zakhari Franklin, Pat Bryant, Cole Rusk, that offensive line, Malik Elzy, Kanari Wilcher, like all of a sudden, like that's an array of weapons that I think can be one of the better passing attacks in the Big Ten. I'm not going to say it's top 5 in this Big Ten, what is now the Big Ten, but that could be a top half Big Ten passing attack with that kind of talent. So I've heard some other Big Ten schools are involved here. I don't know exactly all the schools that are involved, but I'd be honest with you, like just from the outside, I'd be surprised if this marriage doesn't happen with him on an official visit here and not hearing word of him walking in at other official visits, just because this makes so much sense on paper.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. It'd be a big get for Illinois. If you're Justin Stepp, by the way, you've got a lot of self or wide receiver development that you can pass on to someone. And listen, I know people are listening to this say, well, what's it mean for Malik Elzy if Illinois were to land him? I think there's ways, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you'll disagree. Like if you look at Franklin as his time at UTSA evolved, it wasn't any more than 20% in the slot a year, but you saw packages in which he played in the slot. Pat Bryant has talked about adding versatility. I think last year, and you would never say, go away, Isaiah Williams, but you have a guy who's in the slot, like period. I'm not moving Isaiah Williams out of that. I think without having him, whether it's out of necessity or whether it's out of you're able to be more creative, I think having guys who could play there in certain packages would allow you to get all 3 of those guys on the field. And there's so much value, Jeremy, in adding more veteran depth behind Pat Bryant and Malik Elzy, who frankly we penciled in as a starting wide receiver coming out of spring ball. Look how young it gets really beyond Pat. I mean, there's not a lot of production there, and you've got to raise that floor. Zakhari Franklin would raise it, it would seem, in a pretty real way if they were able to land him. So it makes sense on so many fronts. I think you can do it without worrying about, oh, well, now Malik Elzy won't play. Now X play. Like, there's still snaps. Like, there's a lot of snaps to be had at wide receiver.
You know what my answer to that would be? I don't care. I want to win games. And Malik Elzy is a phenomenal talent. I can't wait to see him on the field more. What we've seen on the field so far, inconsistent hands. But we've seen when he does catch the ball, he can win one-on-one battles. I mean, we saw in high school, big, physical. Like, I think he could be amazing as an upperclassman. He's an unproven sophomore who last year had 78 snaps of experience. I'm not ready to pencil him in for 700 yards receiving next year. I would be for Pat Bryant and Zakhari Franklin. And I think those guys could be even better than that. You know what I mean? Like, those guys can be high floor. Like, that'd be my floor of what I think those guys are going to have in the passing game. And then you mix Malik in, getting 300, 400 snaps. And then after Pat Bryant and Zakhari Franklin both leave, here's Malik Elzy, my starting wide receiver, with Ashton Hollins, who got 200 snaps last year. And maybe we go in the portal and get another guy. Like, good programs, it's hard to win starting jobs. They're not just handed to you. And Illinois, like, I get it. He's a 4-star prospect. Sometimes those guys have to wait at programs too, especially better programs. And if you're good enough, you'll force your way in, and they'll play you. Like you said, like, Barry Lundy's going to find a way to play his most talented guys. And it'd be great if you didn't have to play 700 snaps to a receiver, 800 snaps to a receiver. If those guys could get 600 and stay, fresh. But Pat Bryant and Zakhari Franklin, I would probably go in for 85, 90% of the snaps next year.
Yeah, look, if you get like a Malik Elzy on a Pat Bryant development plan where he kind of has that, okay, now he's going to have the 22 Pat Bryant season, which I don't have pulled up.
Pat Bryant had 400 receiving yards as a sophomore, and I'm looking at the snaps, 532 snaps.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I think, one, Illinois needs to have a season. Like, they need to find their way back to 6 wins.
That's why I said I don't care, because
that's right. You're right.
They have to get to a bowl game. Like, so, if Malik gets upset about that, I get that. That's a downside of it, but I need talent, man. I need to win games, and this is a really important year. You go 3-9 this season, things aren't going to be hunky-dory going into 2025, right? But if you get to a bowl game and you do better than that, you surprise people, all of a sudden we could be looking at Brett Bielema is going to be here a really long time.
Yeah, that's right. And look, we should also clarify, like, we've not heard anything about Malik Elzy, right? Like, we haven't heard, so I don't want anyone to think that, like, we haven't heard anything. It's just, we're just talking hypotheticals because I think we know how conversations
when you add somebody,
go
people down the depth chart.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So I just wanted to be clear. Like, this isn't some kind of, can they say, like, we haven't heard anything. It's just a reasonable conversation to have.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I think Zakhari Franklin makes all the sense in the world. And we'll see if anything happens. He started his official visit today, Sunday. So we'll see if anything happens over the next 48 hours or if he decides to go take any other visits. But the fact that this is the first one we've heard of, I just think Illinois is in a good spot there. And I think this makes all the sense. All right. They're also going after some defensive linemen. They hosted Anthony James out of Washington, didn't play his freshman year, was a very highly regarded prep prospect, just unbelievable length and frame, 6'5", 280. But not a guy I could count on next year to play a huge role, Joey, but a guy that I'd love to add long-term if they're able to, so they can develop him. And from what I've heard, the practice film was really good for him at Washington. The coaches at Washington really liked him. So he's going to take some visits to some smaller schools because Illinois is hosting some other defensive line targets here coming up. Gavin Meyer out of Wyoming, a 2-year starter, played nose there. He's 6'4", 290, 280. Feels like he's got some length that he can play a little 3-tech if he needs to. So maybe some versatility there. And then Gentle Hunt, Florida A&M. He's listed at Florida A&M as 5'11", 290, a defensive tackle. So he's a nose tackle. I don't think he's going to be able to line up over tackles because that length is going to hurt him. But from what I've heard, advanced IQ, advanced fundamentals for a defensive lineman, and potentially somebody who could add some depth and competition at that nose tackle spot where you lose Denzel Daxon, like T-Rod Edwards and Nietzsche Sledge are there. But I could never use enough defensive line. And it feels like they're going to try and add 2 here, Joey, which I'm encouraged by. I've also heard they're in on some other higher profile guys, but defensive line seems like the next step if they're able to land Franklin.
Yeah, interesting that some of these guys' profile is nose when our question really, frankly, was, really good to give Alex Bray all of these snaps as we just talked about with Malik Elzy, and a largely unproven sophomore who, like Elzy, they're really high on, but again, important season, the whole conversation we just had. So it is interesting that some of these guys profile more at nose tackle. I do think people should be lining up to play nose tackle for Terrence Jamison because he's got a pretty good pitch and he's done a pretty good job at Illinois at that position. But yeah, that is kind of a big takeaway for me. But I think if we think they're going to add 2, the other one would perhaps not be a nose tackle.
Yeah, it feels like this kid from Gentle Hunt just be nose tackle depth and rotation guy, potentially push for a starting spot. I like that addition. It's a guy who's really succeeded at the FCS level, had a monster game against USF last year. I'd like that addition. Guy wants to prove himself at the next level. Maybe he's got some similarities to Kenyon Jackson, who was 6 foot 290 basically at Illinois, and he played pretty well for them. But I think that 3-tech 4-eye position is more important because of what you said. Alex Bray's unproven. Dennis Briggs going to play one of those spots, but I really like somebody that can make a big impact next year. So maybe that's the holding pattern with Anthony James, is maybe they look for a guy who's a little bit more proven. But I do like the fact that it seems like they're going after 2 defensive linemen because I feel like that rotation needs it. You got 3 upperclassmen defensive linemen and T-Rod Edwards, Dennis Briggs Jr., and Ezekiel Holmes, who is not a proven guy, but right now,
2 of which have had some significant injury history in their college career in Holmes and Briggs.
After all, they're 7th-year guys. So that would make sense. Right now, I have Illinois with 5 open scholarship spots. Wait, do we bring up the Texas A&M transfer kicker? We have not brought up.
We haven't brought up. We'll just touch on it real quick, right? It's I told you after spring ball. Yeah, I said I don't feel great about kicking beyond David Alano. Like, what happens if he gets hurt? What happens if he struggles? Fabrizio Pintone, frankly, he had the good game against Iowa, but he left some to be desired, both in kickoffs and I guess from the little bit of field goal.
Just not a lot of leg strength. If you need a field goal within 35 yards, I feel like he can hit it. Outside of that, like, they need a guy who can potentially. I know David Alano kicked off, but they need a guy who can potentially kick off. Like, what if David Alano pulls a hammy, right? Like, what do you got there? So I know people say we got a kicker. Well, you did lose Caleb Griffin. And David Alano I know he's a high school All-American. I'm excited about him. I love the kid personally, but like, He's still unproven. Plus, you need another kicker that can both kick off and kick long field goals. And Ethan Moczolski was the number one kicker, according to Chris Saylor kicking, according to 24 Sports. But then he had an injury last year at Texas A&M. Illinois gets him as a preferred walk-on. I think that's an incredibly valuable addition. I don't know. He's got 4 years of eligibility. Kickers transfer a lot because there's only so many spots. But even if it's just for 1 year insurance policy, I think that's a great addition.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. Doesn't hurt the scholarship count, which even though I feel like they're in which we'll get into, a fairly good spot with that. But yeah, that's insurance policy at worst. Someone to push David Alano through fall camp. Sounds good to me. That makes sense.
All right. So 5 open scholarships. Say 1 goes to Franklin. Say 2 go to defensive linemen. You'd have 2 left from our count. This is not an official count. What would be priority number 1 if they add 2 defensive linemen and a wide receiver? What else would you want to see them add?
For their last spot?
2. Yeah.
I'm not sure they're completely out on adding 1 more offensive lineman after A.J. Dennis transferred, someone who would be maybe a little more ready to play if they need to call someone this year for the case of an injury. So I think that would probably be it for me. Can I just add corner again?
I don't see
anything wrong with taking 2 corners.
I was gonna say like a younger corner, like somebody with just talent that can compete. Maybe just a veteran from a lower level. Was Terrell Jennings a guy like that?
Mm-hmm.
That could help, just be a veteran presence. That I have to put him on the field. He's been on a Division I field before. I wouldn't mind a guy like that just for a year can again be an insurance policy and be a depth guy who can potentially
be a leader in the locker room.
Yeah, be someone who can help me out there. I wouldn't mind a Clayton Bush-like addition to the cornerback room. I think at this point you got your guy in starter. If you can add a guy who's, hey, I just want to compete at the highest level, I'll play special teams, and I can be an immediate or urgent emergency cornerback starter, that's had experience. I wouldn't mind that. That might be my next priority.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% there. I see someone bringing up running back. I don't think that's in the cards. I don't see that. And I understand why people would say that, but I don't see that in the cards.
It would have had to have been a stud. It would have had to be Dallin Hayden. That's the only reason I would add it, because I like Caden Fagan. Aiden Lawfrey had a great spring. I know the injuries are here. They're all coming back from injuries, but Khalil Valentine's a 4-star running back that's coming in because he can have a chance to play early. We'll see if he can win some reps, because I do think Fagan has a chance to be a workhorse. I think Lawfrey has a chance to be a really good back, and McCray and Anderson, I think, can be guys who can get reps behind Fagan. So I get the idea of it after the year you just went through. I do not see 4 season-ending injuries again. It's not going to happen.
No, I get the fact that some of the Caden Fagan had injuries going back to high school. Aiden Lawfrey had injuries going back to high school. I understand, I guess, the logic behind it. I just think that would be a 2 years in a row would be a rash of bad luck that I just don't imagine you'd see.
And at least they have a preferred walk-on in Aaron Ball coming in who had Division I offers, right? So at least the emergency depth, you're not finding a DB to throw in there.
I remember, what game was that? Was that Minnesota?
Yeah.
Where I was like, what is that? What are we doing here? Who's playing? Who's the backup running back?
The offensive line one's interesting. Because they've already added 3, and 2 of them right now are projected starters. Would it be a right tackle? I don't know if you're going to be able to sell a right tackle. I feel like it'd be more of a backup center that's young, but I think TJ McMillan can play that role. Maybe they do.
Jack Badovanak is the perfect addition.
Okay.
Right? An interior guy who could play, wants to bump up a level. I think that's what you're kind of seeking.
You could sell me on the Jack Badovanak of right tackles.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, that's fine.
I just don't think they need that interior guy because of Schuster, Wigginton, Priestley can play guard, right? Henderson can play guard. I just don't feel like they need another interior guy unless they really feel terrible about their backup center.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think probably more experience is what you're looking for there, more in case of emergency type guy who probably, again, you're right, maybe the position wasn't the perfect fit, but a guy looking to jump up a level and give himself a chance then in the Big Ten.
All right. Any other thoughts before we get out of here, Joey?
No, it's
a big Sunday for Aaron Henry and this defense.
Aaron Henry should be celebrating pretty good today. I will say he was on this pretty quickly from when Terrence Brooks hit the portal. And he got into the house pretty quickly from when Terrence Brooks hit the portal. He's done a really nice job through and through with this. I think because some of the frustration with how the defense went last year, people kind of forgot, and I get it. Aaron Henry can recruit. Aaron Henry can win some people over, and he did that, obviously, in this recruitment. And I think like he deserves a lot of credit for this because he was on this very early, very, very, very early, and ultimately sealed the deal before Brooks wanted to take other visits, which is no small deal.
Yeah, and they've added, like they've recruited well with the prep ranks with some of these DBs. Like Toby was a big flip. Vernon Woodward was a big flip. Like flipping those guys from North Carolina and Wisconsin, two programs that have been way better than you the last several years. Those are significant additions. They're just young, right? Like it takes time to develop. So to add a transfer like that, and I'll tell you this: like Terrence Brooks acted quickly. Zakhari Franklin, they were very prepared for him to hit the portal. So they've acted very quickly there, and we'll see if that could pay off for them. All right. Thank you to the hundreds of people who came on with us tonight on the live YouTube podcast. Hit that like button, subscribe to us, hit the notifications bell as well. We'll have way more on the Illini transfer portal process and who they're going after and all the latest there. I'll have my 7 thoughts column. Got to work on that tonight, but have my what it means up as well. We'll dive more into this as we go forward. For Joey Wagner, I'm Jeremy Werner. Everybody have a great night. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast.